Hello, everyone. We're going to continue our study of Mark now. And with this lesson, we're moving into the 5th chapter of Mark, which is quite a remarkable chapter. Probably one of the most strange chapters in all of the Gospels. This is the episode in the first 20 verses of Mark chapter 5, where Jesus casts a legion of demons out of a demon-possessed man. And the demons then rush into a herd of pigs, and the pigs rush down the bank into the Sea of Galilee, where they all drown. So let's take a look at this passage, and I think you're going to find that it's actually very delightful. So let me share my screen. And here's the Gospel of Mark, Mark chapter 5. My name is Legion. So, this is the story of the Gaderene demoniac, and the miracles performed by Jesus in the first 3 chapters of Mark were primarily healings and casting out of individual demons. And the healings fulfilled a prophetic role because they fulfilled the prophecies in the book of Isaiah about the nature of the kingdom during the rule of the Messiah. So in this way, Jesus was establishing that he was the Messiah by performing miracles consistent with the millennial reign of the Messiah. But when we see Jesus casting out demons, he does it primarily because he's wanting to silence the demons who are trying to disrupt Jesus's preaching of the good news about the coming of the kingdom. And then, of course, the scribes used this to accuse him of using Satan's power to cast out demons. But we've now moved into a new section in Jesus's ministry, and he has now been rejected by the religious leadership. He's been rejected by his own family. He's been rejected by the crowds. And even though there's still many people following him, they're not following him because of his message. They're following him because of the miracles that they're performing, and especially the healings. So in Mark 4, we see Jesus's first great nature miracle. And we see Jesus now being revealed to his disciples as more than just Messiah. He is the Son of God. He is God. And if you remember from our previous session, where we looked at the Jesus asleep in the boat, Jesus calmed the winds and the waves with a word. He just said, "Hush, be still." And when the winds and the waves obeyed Jesus's voice, it said the disciples were greatly afraid. And they said, "Who is this that the wind and the waves obey his voice?" So now we're going to see another great miracle here, following right on the heels of this stilling of the wind and the waves. Now this is going to take place in the region of the Gerasenes. Mark and Luke both refer to it as the region of the Gerasenes. Matthew calls it the regions of the Gadarenes. And this episode is generally called the healing of the Gaderene demoniac. Now we're going to actually propose that the episode actually occurs near a small town called Gergesa, which is near the modern village of Kursi. And now Gadara and Gerasa were both cities of the Decapolis. And we'll talk more about the Decapolis in a second here. But this is a region on the east side of the Sea of Galilee that contained Greek settlements that were now ruled by the Romans. It's a Gentile area. The cities were settled by the Greeks after the death of Alexander the Great, when Alexander the Great swept through the Middle East and conquered everything that was available to be conquered, including the Persian Empire. After the death of Alexander the Great, this part of his empire broke into 4 segments. And this part was reigned by the Seleucid kings out of Syria. And they settled 4 Greek cities in what we, during Jesus's day, will call the Decapolis. And these are independent city-states, and they're modeled after the great city-states of Greece. So here's a map, and what I want you to see here is we have the Sea of Galilee up here in the north. So Capernaum is right up at the very tip of the Sea of Galilee. And these colored regions here, these are the cities of the Decapolis. And notice, and that's Decapolis. So the Greek word for 10, Deca, and the Greek word for city, polis, so the 10 city region. And kind of an honorary member is Damascus up here at the very top. And then we have 9 more cities ranging from Kanatha in the northeast, Scythopolis on the far west, and Philadelphia on the far south. And Gerasa is the name for the region that's used by Mark and Luke, whereas Gadara is the region, the name used for by Matthew for this region. And we actually think that the best fit for the description is a little city up here near Hippos, in the city of Hippos, and probably a little village called Gerasa. Now, if we zoom in a little bit, here's Capernaum up here near the tip. Here's Gergesa. We're near where we think the miracle occurs. And then we have Gadara down here, and Gerasa is actually off the bottom of the map. So in chapter 4, Jesus and the disciples get in a boat, and they're heading to the other side, probably over here in the Bethsaida region, where Jesus has gone before and will go again. But instead, they find themselves over in the Decapolis. So chapter 5 opens with the boat making shore in a Gentile area. Now, we don't know whether Jesus intended to go here, or whether he just got in the boat, fell asleep, and the disciples got blown off course. But for any event, he's not in a Jewish area here. They appear to land far from any kind of city or village. Instead, they're near a cemetery, and they're near a place where there's a pig herd, of all things. And as they come ashore, they're accosted by a wild man who is a demon possessed and living among the tombs. And Matthew tells us that there were 2 men who were actually demon possessed, but Mark and Luke apparently focus on just the dominant man, who is probably the one that does all the talking. So let me read the section. So remember, chapter 4 ends with the episode of the storm, where Jesus has to be awakened by the disciples because he's asleep in the boat. And they say, "Don't you care that we're perishing?" He says, "Oh, you of little faith." It says, tells to the wind and the rain and the wind and the waves to hush. And then the disciples say, "Who is this?" They came to the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gerasenes. When he got out of the boat, immediately a man from the tombs with an unclean spirit met him, and he had his dwelling among the tombs, and no one was able to bind him anymore, even with a chain, because he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and the chains had been torn apart by him and the shackles broken in pieces, and no one was strong enough to subdue him. Constantly, night and day, he was screaming among the tombs and in the mountains, gashing himself with stones. Seeing Jesus from a distance, he ran up and bowed down before him, and shouting with a loud voice, he said, so I'm not going to shout, but you should shout in your head here, "What business do we have with each other, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God, do not torment me." For he had been saying, in other words, for Jesus had been saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus was asking him, "What is your name?" And the demon-possessed man said to Jesus, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he began to implore Jesus earnestly not to send him out of the country. Now there was a large herd of swine feeding nearby on the mountain. The demons implored him, saying, "Send us into the swine so that we may enter them." Jesus gave them permission, and coming out, the unclean spirits entered the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea, about 2,000 of them, and they were drowned in the sea. Their herdsmen ran away and reported it in the city and in the country. And the people came to see what it was that had happened. They'd come to Jesus and observed the man who had been demon possessed sitting down, clothed and in his right man, the very man who had had the legion. And they became frightened. Those who had seen it described to them how it had happened to the demon possessed man and all about the swine. And they began to implore him to leave their region. As he was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon possessed was imploring him that he might accompany him. And he did not let him, but he said to him, "Go home to your people and report to them what great things the Lord has done for you and how he had mercy on you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis what great things Jesus had done for him, and everyone was amazed. So quite a rip-roaring story, typical of what we see in Peter here. So well told and quite dramatic. So let's go through this now, section at a time. They came to the other side of the sea, into the country of the Gerasenes. Now, many scholars, not all, but many, think that they have located an area called Gergesa at the time of Christ, near a village north of the Decapolis city of Hippo, where there's a pasture where they might have herded the swine. There's a steep bank, and there are cliff tombs. So this does appear to fit the description that's given by Mark, Matthew, and Luke. And apparently this was a remote location. There are no dock or piers. There's no city or village. The herdsmen have to run off to the village to report what had happened. So it does make you wonder if perhaps the boat was blown off course. And so it's quite easy to imagine the wet, tired, sleepless disciples dragging the boat ashore and being greeted by a demon-possessed man. And he'd often been bound with shackles and chains, but he tore the chains apart and the shackles he broke in pieces, and no one was strong enough to subdue him. And he was screaming among the tombs and in the mountains and gashing himself with stones. So this man was in torment. The demons were tormenting their host like parasites. He's sleepless, and he's cutting and maiming his own body. He dwells by himself. Now we learn from Matthew that there's actually two men, but the two of them have only the dead as their companions as he's dwelling among the tombs. And Luke also tells us that the man was naked. So this is quite a sight, this unkept, bedraggled, probably bloody, scarred, wounded man screaming at them as they try to drag the boat ashore. And seeing Jesus from a distance, he ran up and bowed before him, and shouting with a loud voice, he said, "What business do we have with each other, Jesus, Son of the Most High God?" So the demons immediately recognized Jesus as the Son of the Most High God. Now, this is a title used for Yahweh in the Old Testament, Most High God. We also see it used in Acts. And so the demons recognize who Jesus is, just as they did in chapters 2, 3, and 4 of Mark. The disciples haven't quite figured it out yet. The scribes are rejecting it, and the people are missing it, but the demons are right on the spot. So they're with us. They recognize that Jesus is God. He accosts Jesus and the disciples. And you wonder if the purpose of this is not to disrupt his ministry, just as we see the demon-possessed people disrupting Jesus's ministry over in Galilee. Now, legion is a military term. It's a group of soldiers from 2,000 to 6,000. And when he says, "My name is Legion, for we are many," he's implying that there are thousands of demons possessing this poor man. Now, our New American Standard says, what business do we have with each other, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I implore you by God, do not torment me. Kind of an ironic statement, seeing what he was doing, these demons were doing to the poor man. And for he had been saying to him, for Jesus had been saying to the demons, to the man, come out of the man, you unclean spirit. Now, this is singular. And he was asking him, what is your name? Now, had been saying to him, I think it's possible in the Greek to translate this, for he had begun to say to him. So it's not as though Jesus had been commanding the demon to come out for a long time and the demon wasn't coming out. Jesus began to command the demon to come out, and the demon complains. And so Jesus asked him, what's your name? And he says, my name is Legion, for we are many. And he began to implore him earnestly not to send them out of the country. Now, this is quite a confusing statement here, not to send them out of the country. The word is, Greek word is kora, which can just mean a space or a place or a land. So he could possibly be saying, asking Jesus not to send him out of the person that he was inhabiting, rather than pleading not to be sent out of the Decapolis or out of the region of Gerasa. It could just be a place. So the demons could have been wanting to stay in the man. And now there was a large herd of swine feeding nearby, and the demons implored him, saying, send us into the swine so that we may enter them. And bizarrely, Jesus gave them permission. And coming out, the unclean spirits entered the swine, and the herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea, about 2,000 of them, and they were drowned in the sea. So not only they fall in the water, they don't try to get out of the water, they stay in the water and they drown. So this confirms this is a Gentile area. Of course, pigs were unclean to Jews. Jews did not eat swine flesh. Now, if we go look at the Mark and the Matthew and Luke parallel passages, we see the demons were complaining that Jesus was judging them before the time, and they pleaded with him not to be sent into the abyss. Now, these appear to me to be references to the final judgment and to Hades. And so if you want to look at 2 Peter 2:4 and Revelation 9:11, you'll see that there are currently demons held in the abyss. They don't have access to the human world. It's sometimes speculated that these are the demons from Genesis 6. And in Revelation 9, we have a demon of the abyss, Apollyon, who is released from the abyss and given access to the people of the earth, along with a swarm of demons that appear in the form of demonic locusts. So it appears to me that these demons in the man are complaining that Jesus is judging them before the last judgment, and asking that he not send them down into the abyss where Apollyon and the angels to be released in Revelation 9 during the tribulation are located. Now, permission just is from a verb that means to entrust, or hence to permit. So Jesus allows them to go into the swine and not to go anywhere else. Enter, it's just eis erkomai, which just means to go into or to enter. So it appears from the Greek that they actually enter into the swine. So as crazy as that sounds, that's what the text tells us. Now, why did the demons want to go into the swine and then rush down to the sea to drown their new host? Were they trying to thwart Jesus? Were they trying to make him look like a fool? Were they trying to create enmity between the people of the region of the Decapolis and Jesus? We don't know. We're just guessing. Why did Jesus allow it? Did he know what they were going to do? I think it's almost certain that he did. He knew what was in the hearts of men. I suspect he knew what was in the hearts of the demons. So why did Jesus allow this? And I think this is probably, at least partly, a refutation to the charge of the scribes that he cast out Satan by the finger of Satan. Here he casts out a whole satanic army, a whole legion of demons. And I think this is also a sign to the Gentiles. So when Jesus is going to return to the Decapolis in Mark 7, and he's going to be greeted by crowds. I think it's reasonable speculation to think that this spectacular event and the healing of the demon-possessed man and the suicide of the swine creates around Jesus a lot of a buzz, a legend. So when he shows up in chapter 7 in the Decapolis again, he's greeted by crowds who are looking for him for healing. So I think God and Jesus knew exactly what they were doing. The demons probably thought they were creating problems for Jesus when instead they were actually setting him up for a great success a few months down the line. So the herdsmen ran away and reported it in the city and in the country. So they say in the city and in the country. So I think it's likely that these were hired herdsmen who were watching the swines for multiple owners. And so they go back to the people who owned the swine and to tell them what had happened. And it says, and the people came to see what it was that had happened. And then Mark switches into the present tense in this next sentence. So he's inviting us to put ourselves emotionally into the situation of the owners of the pigs who are coming to investigate what has happened to their pigs. And they come to Jesus and observe the man who had been demon-possessed, sitting down, clothed, in his right man, the very man who had had the legion. And they became frightened. So I think it's easy to understand why they're frightened by this event, just as the disciples were frightened by the stilling of the waves. This man is apparently legendary in the area. This demon-possessed man is legendary in the area. No one can subdue him. He can't be bound with chains. He can't be bound with shackles. He breaks them apart. He is sleepless among the ruins and the tombs night and day, screaming in a loud voice. So this man was a legendary terror. And they come and he's in his right mind. He's no longer naked. And he's sitting at the feet of Jesus. Now, those who had seen it described to them how it had happened to the demon-possessed man and all about the swine. So now, I think it's quite likely within the Greek and the Jewish religion that they might have thought Jesus was a god. It was common in Greek and Roman mythology for the gods to assume the form of humans and to appear among men. And it was usually bad news for people when they did appear. So they might have thought that Jesus was a god. But they're frightened, as the disciples had been just a few hours earlier. It's also quite likely that this is quite an economic blow to these people. I'm just using, the 2020 numbers here in Oklahoma. So I don't know if I'm undervaluing or overvaluing the swine, but an adult pig today would cost you between $300 and $1,000. So just using 500 as a nice round number, this is $1 million worth of pigs that have been killed. So they're not only in shock because this crazy man is in his right mind, clothed and seated at Jesus's feet, but they're also in shock from the great economic loss that they've just experienced. And they begin to implore him to leave the region. So I take this to mean to leave the region of the Greek Decapolis cities. Now, Mark says, as Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed, we never learn his name, was imploring him that he might accompany him. Richard Bauckham has a hypothesis that when we have situations like this where there's a character in the Gospels whose name we don't get, but the reason this person's name is not given is because that person was still alive at the time of the writing of the Gospel. So I think it's likely that at the time that this is being, Mark is recording this gospel and Peter is preaching it to the Roman Christians, that to the best of their knowledge, this demon-possessed man was still alive and was still available as a witness in the cities of the Decapolis, or at least, or possibly in Jerusalem at this time. And Jesus did not let the man come with him, but said to him, "Go home to your people and report to them what great things the Lord has done for you and how he had mercy on you." So your people here, these are the Greeks. Jesus and the disciples are Jews. Jesus sends the Greek man home, or sends the Gentile man home to his Gentile city. Now this is a pattern that we will see all the way through the Gospels, and we'll start to see the shift occur in the book of Acts. But the man obeys Jesus, so he doesn't get his request from Jesus. He requests to go with Jesus. Jesus sends him home to his own Gentile people. And the man's response is remarkable. He went away and began to proclaim in Decapolis what great things Jesus had done for him. And everyone was amazed. So we have a true disciple here who is a Gentile. He's given a mission, go report to your own people. He didn't just go home to his home city or his home family. He goes across the whole Decapolis. And so when Jesus returns to the Decapolis in Mark 7, there's great crowds that turn out to see him. So this man really did his job in a bang-up way here. So just some observations. One, I've already mentioned this, but this is a dramatic rebuke to the charge of the scribes that Jesus was working with Satan. Here he casts a whole army of demons out. But this also illustrates what Jesus said to the scribes in Mark 3:27, that no one can disarm a strong man and plunder his house unless he is more powerful than the strong man. Here, Jesus plunders the strong man's house, the demon-possessed man, and casts out an army of demons. So the spokesman here, who calls himself Legion, this is probably a officer in a unit. So our best understanding of the demonic realm is that the demons are organized like a military establishment, where you have higher order demons, with Satan being the highest demon. And this is a legion here would be an officer that would represent someone who would be in charge of 20 or 30 centurions in the Roman army. So he's probably something like a lieutenant general here, or maybe a colonel. But Jesus is far above all rule and authority and power and dominion. We read this in Ephesians 1:21, and this is widely taken to reference the different orders in which the demonic realm is organized, or possibly also even the angelic realm. So this makes the point, which you and I probably don't need having been made to us, that Jesus and Satan are not on a par. Jesus is the creator. Satan is just a creature. Satan continues to exist only because God allows him to continue to exist. They're not matched. There's not a battle going on between the two. Satan is an evil fallen angel who Jesus tolerates because he helps accomplish God's eternal purposes in the creation of the world and the bringing of many brothers into his family, the family of Jesus. Now, kind of as an aside here, this is clear evidence that demonic possession can produce superhuman strength. And it does make me think of the illegal drug PCP, which is on the street called angel dust, which is known to give people high on PCP superhuman strength, so that they're very, very dangerous to policemen who have to try to subdue these people. And here the demons are able to give this man superhuman strength. Now, with drugs like PCP, part of what the PCP does is removes all of the guy's inhibitions, so that, normally we have feedback loop in our muscles and bones, and we won't strain our arms and our muscles to the point where we injure ourselves, but someone on PCP will do that. They will exert all of their strength, even if it breaks their own bones or tears their own muscles and tendons. And apparently, the demons are able to cause this poor man to do the exhibit the same kind of superhuman strength by overriding the feedback signals that our muscles and our bones and our joints give us to prevent us from injuring ourselves. This also does indicate that demons can affect control over animals when God allows them to have that position. So there's some interesting insights here into the demonic realm. It's also particularly interesting that when you compare this passage with Genesis 6 and 2 Peter 2:4 and Revelation 9:11, it supports the idea of there being a class of especially virulent angels, virulent fallen angels that are bound in a holding cell, denied access to the human race, but that they will be released during the Great Tribulation. So you might want to read Genesis 6:1-4, 2 Peter 2:4, and Revelation 9:11. So 2 Peter specifically seems to be describing the sons of the gods in Genesis 6, who interacted with human women to create a race of supermen. But then Peter tells us that these fallen angels are now being held in the abyss. But Revelation 9 tells us they will be released near the midpoint of the tribulation. But after they accomplish God's purpose, they are judged in the final judgment and cast into the lake of fire after the resurrection of the unrighteous dead at the end of the millennium. Now, Jesus didn't allow the Gentile to follow him. This is 100% consistent through all the Gospels, Acts, and the epistles. The gospel, Paul says in Romans 1:16, is to the Jew first, yet also to the Greek. And you need to remember that the message Jesus is proclaiming to Israel is that the kingdom of God is at hand, the Messiah is at hand. God is ready to reestablish his rule over the earth through the nation of Israel. And Jesus, is God's chosen king, but he's rejected. Now, we're going to see it. We'll see if we go to the book of Acts next, that in Acts, the gospel is first proclaimed after the resurrection, once again in Jerusalem, then in Samaria. And even when Paul and Barnabas begin to take the gospel around the Roman world, they go to the synagogues first. And so Paul writes in Romans 1:16, I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God unto salvation for all men, to the Jew first. And so we'll see in Acts 2, Peter's Pentecost sermon is to the Jews. And Paul's ministry to the cities of the empire, it goes to the synagogues first. And you might want to go read Romans 11, where Paul says, I magnify my ministry to the Gentiles, that I might make the Jews jealous, and perhaps some of them might be saved. And of course, many Jews do come to be followers of Christ through Paul's ministry. So this man who's freed from demon possession is really a model for all of us. Was this a divine appointment? Was it the reason for the storm? Was it the reason was the storm the cause of the boat being blown off course, so that Jesus meets this tormented man, terrorizing the area that he lived in, whom he never would have met apart from the storm. And it's also easy to imagine this experience from the point of view of the disciples. I'm sure that they were totally exhausted when that boat pulled ashore, and they get to meet this demon-possessed man and end up having to cast right back off right into the lake. Freed from his slavery to Satan, he longed to follow Jesus. But he's denied his request to follow Jesus in the way that he wanted, but he still follows Jesus in the way that Jesus instructs him to follow him. He says, return home and tell what has been done for you. And the man takes home to be all of the Decapolis. So were these citizens of the cities of the Decapolis among the Greeks who pled with Philip to see Jesus in John 12? It'll be fun to get to heaven and find out if that's the case. So quite a remarkable story here, and a very critical point in the ministry of Jesus, and a critical point in our understanding exactly who Jesus is. And this is another step in Jesus's education of the disciples, so that they discover that he is not just a man, he is the God-man. He's not just the Messiah, he's God incarnate. And so I'll stop at this point, and we'll continue on with the rest of chapter 5 in the next session.
You're very enthusiastic as you were sharing.